I think that we take for granted sometimes just how different the shape of Jesus' ministry was from our own. He was itinerant, traveling from town to town and asking his apostles to do the same. He taught and preached both in the synagogue, in the public square, in people's homes, on boats, wherever there was someone to listen. He built up a community of followers, of leaders, of colleagues, apostles, preachers, from scratch. First 2, then 12, then 72, and so on. It's probably telling that my very first reaction is, wow, how vulnerable, how potentially embarrassing. What if nobody wanted to listen? What if nobody was interested in the message? What if when you asked people to follow you or to become leaders in your movement, they said no? What if people got mad or thought that you were weird or decided you were a nuisance or got the wrong idea about you? It feels relatively safe to be within the walls of a place like this. Presumably, you all are here because you want to be here, or because this place is familiar, or because there is something that you know that you can get here. We all more or less know what we're doing in this place. Surprises would be surprising here. It feels much more exposing to wonder what ministry outside of this sanctuary, with people who might be suspicious of us, or hurting, or who do not already know what we are talking about, or who have never heard of this. The true thing is that Jesus' ministry was vulnerable, probably was embarrassing. There were people who got mad at him, who thought him a nuisance, who got the wrong idea about him. But how many more were there who heard his message and saw something hopeful in it? Who heard his proclamation of good news for the poor, the oppressed, and dropped everything to follow him? How many saw his works of healing and care and went and told even more people about what he was doing? Jesus' itinerant ministry was vulnerable, but also much needed in a hurting and broken world. And at the end of the day, it worked, because here we still are today. So this morning, I would like to take as our starting place that we are called to speak with people who are outside of our walls, and in the way that Jesus did. We are called to talk to people who are suspicious of us, or hurting, or wondering, or skeptical, or who simply do not know anything about what we do. And we are called to talk to them in a way that they can hear. I think that part of us shaking ourselves out of our own thinking in order to do this talking is to ask some of our most basic questions again and not take the answers for granted. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and we're going to see how that feels. What is the purpose of church? What is the goal of ministry? What does it mean to be community? Who is Christ Lutheran Church? What have you found meaningful about this place? How do you see people struggling? How are people hurting? What could be done to support people in their struggle or in their hurt? How is this church called to minister? That's all my questions. You could hear a pin drop. These questions deserve much more than a sermon's worth of thinking and reflecting. If you want those questions later, we can share them. But this is a kind of reflecting that, even as a fully formed new priest, has singed my eyebrows over and over the last few months. Only because these are the kinds of questions I find that I'm having to ask in my own ministry with young people. How do you describe to a 15-year-old who thinks that church is boring, that church maybe has something worthwhile? How do you describe that in a way that allows their feeling to also be valid? How do you describe to an agnostic 22-year-old what kind of community we are trying to build in our campus ministry without just recycling the words Eucharist, communion, discipleship, mission, Trinitarian, perichoresis? How do you hold space for a 30-year-old who has been hurt by the church, who is afraid to come back but still feels like there's something missing in their lives? The same as in Jesus' time, as in ours, this is a broken and hurting world full of people who are struggling, and we are among them. People are in need of hope. People are in need of community. People are in need of care. And though we are not always perfect at it, Christian communities are where hope and community and care are the main course of what we offer. And I just have to wonder, who doesn't need that? Who doesn't need a place where they can openly talk about their burnout, their weariness, and know that it won't be made worse there? Who doesn't need a place where they will be known and seen, and cared for. Not because they're cool, not because they're interesting, but just because that's what we do here. Who doesn't want a place where they can name their anxieties about the future and imagine together with other people what kind of a world might be possible? Who doesn't want a community where they can just be? I'm heartened by the conversations that I've had on campus with young adults, and I'm heartened by Jesus' ministry. It's less interesting to me in this day and age to resign ourselves to a simple, people just don't want church anymore, or young people just don't care about religion anyways. And it's much more interesting to me, and perhaps more faithful, to ask, how are people struggling? What do they need? What can the church offer? And after so much time spent hauling in empty nets in our fishing, I wonder how it might change our perspective about ourselves, our ministry, to know that there is a great haul to be had in our reaching out to people. Amen.